Politicians reveal the double standard by which they operate on. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. Happy New Year, everyone. It's a pleasure to be heading into 2021 with this audience, and hopefully we can continue to grow and talk about cool things. In 2020, we spoke a lot about the pandemic, understandably. That was the king when it came to content. The main thing that everyone was focusing on, and it looks like the first half of 2021 will be the same. Many COVID headlines, and hopefully by the end of next year, we'll have some new things to focus on. Hopefully a subject matter that is a little bit less dire than a global pandemic that has everyone freaking out. But for today, we'll be keeping with that spirit, and we'll be outlining the seeming double standard that Canadian politicians have been showing us as of late, and that is in relation to COVID-19 and the plethora of politicians who have still continued to travel. And that's despite their own advice and public health figures telling us not to do this, and the average citizen has listened, but you have the elites, the powerful, the actual lawmakers who are going out there and saying these rules may not apply to me. So, this entire conversation was sparked by the Ontario Finance Minister. Now it's actually the previous Ontario Finance Minister because he was forced to resign, but essentially what happened is he took a vacation to the Caribbean amid a pandemic, amid the province he came from, the province he represented, being in lockdown. So, you can see already the attitude there. Saying, yeah, the common folk are in lockdown, the common folk can't go see their family, the common folk can't go travel. Well, I'm not a common folk. I'm a politician. And he's taking a vacation to the Caribbean. That's insane. And I will reiterate, the Canadian public health guidelines explicitly state to avoid all non-essential travel during this pandemic. Yet, you have situations like the following. Now, Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, came under fire too. At first, he tried to play dumb. He was saying, I had no idea. He was going on vacation, blah, 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 blah. And then it comes out he did know. Now, he was in hot water, and just to save himself, he essentially force-fired the finance minister. He gave him the grace of resigning, but you know it came from the top down. That was an executive order from Doug Ford to get out of here. Now we should also be very clear. The finance minister didn't lose his job entirely. Really, he's still a member of provincial parliament. He was an elected representative, so he gets to keep that. Once you're an MPP though, you can be given certain portfolios based on what the boss wants to give you. The boss being the premier. Doug Ford anointed him the finance minister, and that came with various perks. So you get the portfolio, you get some money, some benefits, all on top of whatever your base salary is from being the MPP. So he's going back to that, but he's not going to be struggling. He's a relatively well-off individual, so to him it's probably not the end of the world, not that big of a deal. He's probably more worried about the fact that he may not get reelected given all of this turmoil. And the way the public is viewing him now, people really wanted his head. They don't seem to be satisfied with simply him resigning from the finance role. I have a strong feeling the next election, he'll be gone, but we'll see. So after that domino fell, there was a bunch of other politicians across Canada who were being exposed too. So in Alberta, you have an MLA going to Mexico. You have the municipal affairs minister and some education press secretaries going to Hawaii. Even Jason Kenney, the premier, his chief of staff went to America. Interestingly enough though, Jason Kenney, the premier, did the opposite of Doug Ford when these accusations and evidence came to light. The people under his watch were traveling and going against the public health guidelines, things that the average person would be ostracized for doing. Can you imagine if like your coworker or something decided to say, forget the public health guidelines, forget all that, I'm going to go to Mexico because I want a vacation. You would look at them as a selfish individual. Now, I'll talk more about why that's a terrible idea, but that's not the average person we're talking about. These are elected politicians, people who are supposed to represent you. And they're very clearly saying that their leisure is superior to the public's well-being. It's a terrible look. Now, Jason Kenney, at the time of this recording, has not taken the measures that Doug Ford has. He has not forced anyone to resign. In fact, he hasn't really done too much about it. He seems to be creating excuses, not really caring, and it kind of fits his persona. Jason Kenney isn't really, I would say, a for the people politician. Now, he branded himself as that, but there's been numerous accusations, numerous documents coming out, somewhat hinting at the corruption of him favoring his posse, him having an interest group and representing them. Not really the people per se. I think he's a terrible premier, and his actions here seem to solidify that. If you did care about your constituents, about the people of Alberta, why would there not be consequences for these politicians so blatantly just ignoring the things your government, the things the federal government, and the things that Health Canada have been saying for the longest time? That behavior is not acceptable from a politician that's supposed to be the leaders of our society. And you let them get away with things like this, it looks terrible. And I'm sure the people of Alberta are not happy with that decision that he's making to not reprimand these individuals for just going against common sense behavior during a pandemic. It's unacceptable. Now, fast forward to a couple days after, and in another province, we have Manitoba. You have an NDP MP who traveled to Greece to visit a sick grandparent. And of course, there's nuance here. We'll talk about that as well. Right now, I'm just outlining to you the various accusations so you get an idea for the scale. It's not just one party, not just one province, it's a bunch of politicians from across the map. Then after that, even Quebec, you have liberal politicians who are caught going on vacation to Barbados, and there are even more. There's a variety, and every day there seems to be more coming out. The current list that I'm seeing today, at the time of the recording, is not exhaustive. There are so many politicians who are doing things against common sense guidelines, against public health guidelines, but it hasn't come to light yet. Given the fervor, though, that the media and the public is having right now, I'm sure we'll have many more names come out over the course of the next couple weeks. I don't have to go over all of the names for you to get the point. I do have a couple of observations to make right now, though. So, the first thing I'll say is that the people, the constituents, have a right to be angry. It's clearly a double standard. You are telling the citizens, do not do this, do not do that. You can't go see your sick family members in the hospital. You can't travel to do this, you can't do that. And yet, here they are, doing it. They're basically saying, do as I tell you. Don't do as I do. And that's hypocritical. It's a double standard. It's not acceptable coming from our leaders of the country. It's a bad look, and it makes it hard for people to trust you. If you're telling them not to do something, but you think it's safe to do it yourself, they're going to wonder, what's actually the reason then behind this? Is there a good reason, or are you just BSing us? And these kind of questions are disastrous during a pandemic. We have to be on the same page about everything. We need some national cohesion, and these actions here undermine that. At the very beginning, at the onset of these news articles coming out, there were individuals who were saying, yeah, this is something to be expected. Coming from Doug Fort's conservative government, from Jason Kenney's conservative government, the right-leaning individuals who perhaps have not taken the pandemic so seriously, but we're seeing that that's not true, actually. These scandals, if you want to call it that, are coming out of every party. From every province, we have NDP members, liberal members, there's no end to it. It's politicians in general. Now, the facade they've put on, that might have influenced the way you've seen it. Of course, we have the NDP acting like it's a very serious thing, the Liberals acting like it's a very serious thing, but yet we have Liberal and NDP politicians who are doing these same things as the Conservative. At the end of the day, these are people in power positions who are not taking their role with the proper due diligence. They're not doing things as they should be. And some of them were reprimanded, like the Ontario Finance Minister, like the NDP individual who went to go visit their sick grandparent, and I do think that one is more controversial. But on the other side of things, we have people who were not punished, people who were able to get away with their behavior. And I'm not too sure where you stand on that, but as you can see, our very leaders are having a difference of opinion. Some of them are taking it more seriously than others. It's once again showing how divided we are. Philosophically, intellectually, there should be a standard response to this. If you go against the rules you put in place, if you go against the public health guidelines during a pandemic, what happens to you? It can't be in Alberta, this happens, in Ontario, that happens. It has to be a Canada-wide thing. We have to be on the same page if we want to get through this thing effectively, and we have failed at that thus far. Now, I also want to circle back to the nuance I talked about here. There is a very big difference between an individual going to the Bahamas because they want to get their yearly vacation in, because they don't want to deal with the Canadian snow, versus someone who is traveling to see a sick parent or a sick grandparent or someone who doesn't have much time left. There has to be understanding here. In the first case, that's just complete foolishness. It's insane. You literally have a terrible impetus that's making you travel. To go on vacation, it's nonsense. As a politician, you should be smarter than that. As someone, though, who's going to see a sick relative, here we have to be a little bit more understanding. The politicians really are people. I'm not too sure if the NDP's judgment to penalize their rep for going to Greece to visit a sick grandparent was the best thing. If you were in that individual's shoes and you were informed that your grandmother was very sick, perhaps there wasn't much time left, I can almost guarantee you would find a way to go see them. Now, once again, in the first example, if you're planning your trip to Barbados and you don't want to be swayed by public health guidelines, that's simply folly. It's asinine. There, all of the criticism is deserved. You should step down as the finance minister because your judgment is something to be questioned. The other case, though, about the family member, that's controversial. I will say as well, though, I understand the public's grievances about it because many of us, regular citizens, were told when we had family in the hospital that we couldn't see them because it was not safe, because of COVID, because of all this. Many of us have family and friends and whoever across the border in America who we can't go see even if they're sick. We don't have that same privilege, though, as the politician. Perhaps they have a way of using their power to get things done, to get these flights and these connections to make sure they are allowed to see their loved ones. And there again, we have the double standard. Although a bit more understandable, it still reeks of hypocrisy. Telling someone that they can't do this, but here you are doing the same thing, having an exception being made for you, just because you're a politician. It shouldn't work like that, and there we have the difficult thing. If you're telling citizens that they cannot see their loved ones in the hospital, you should also follow that rule. And I know it's hard. As a human, you'll be tempted to not follow that, especially during these highly emotional times. And I'm not too sure what to say about this. I don't want to cast too harsh a judgment because, being real, if any of us were in that position, you had the ability to leverage your role to see a loved one who was sick in the hospital. And even though the regular citizen might not have that ability, you would still do it. You wouldn't care about that. Some things are greater, you could say, than your job. And I would put your family and the health of them up there. Now, after that, you have more cases of people who are just traveling for leisure, and of course, that's condemnable. Here, though, I do wonder if we've been too harsh, and I'll leave that up to you guys to decide. Now, I'll move on to my other thought about what happened here. So, I was actually surprised for some reason to find out that it was very easy for you to travel still. For some reason, I was under the impression that planes were still grounded, and maybe that was because I was living under a rock, but I didn't know you could just hop on a plane and go to Mexico or Barbados right now. And I asked around to some of my colleagues, and they're telling me, yeah, we know people who have done that. You still can. So I don't know. I was just shocked by that. But apparently, you can do it. Planes and trips are still operational. You can hop on a plane right now if you want to go to Cuba and whatnot. So I do question the federal government's decision there. You know, why even permit non-essential travel? Why even have flights going out to Cuba and Mexico for leisure during a pandemic? It seems like a terrible idea. You can have some flights going out, but I would put into position a sort of, limit or a sort of gauge there to ask the individual and ask them to provide documentation for why they're going somewhere. Are you going because it's essential, because you have a job there? Are you going because someone in your family is sick, or are you going there to lounge on the beach? And of course, if it is purely recreational, I don't think it should be happening. Now, I do get you have the airline company's major Canadian industry there, Air Canada, Air Transat, who are probably pressuring the federal government. They want to make money. They don't want to be on the sidelines for what would be going on a year. So maybe they're lobbying Trudeau, telling him, hey, let us fly again. Maybe those other countries are saying, hey, Trudeau, we need tourism. Despite the pandemic, our economies are going to collapse. Let people come over here. Because from a Canadian perspective, it doesn't really make too much sense, and here's why. Let's use Cuba as an example, and I'm not trying to disparage them here, but this is a fact, okay? So testing is hard to do. We're guaranteed to be making assumptions based on incomplete evidence, so Cuban government officials can come forward and say we have 200 cases a day here. And you might say, okay, that seems pretty low, but you don't know the full scope of that measurement. You don't know how many tests they've conducted. You don't know how many false positives are there. You don't know how their practices are. Are they up to the same standard as Canada? You don't know if the data has been manipulated because they want to make you feel comfortable still traveling there. And there really are two circumstances here, two scenarios. It's either you're going from Canada to a place that is worse off, that has more cases, and if you do that, you're creating some type of osmosis where Canadians are going there, getting infected perhaps, and coming back and bringing it to Canada. Even if you self-isolate when you get back, you're still going to be with people in the plane. You're still going to be doing other things. Like when you get the Uber Eats, maybe you have some contact there with the individual at the door. Or you're getting a package or whatever. Or on the taxi ride back from the airport to your house. These things are going to happen. And you're essentially importing COVID-19 into Canada. Now, the other case could be you're going from Canada to a place with less of a pandemic. Well, it's still a pandemic. You're going to a place with less of an outbreak. In this case, you probably are not going to be importing the virus into Canada because you're going to a place where things are relatively stable, but you will be exporting it. It's like a Canadian going to New Zealand or something, if that was allowed. They have relatively low cases, but by letting travelers come in from around the world, that may not be the case for long. See, right now, the problem actually is a moral decision-making one. It's up to you to decide, so the planes can fly you to Cuba if you want. These politicians didn't break any laws, actually. It was the advice of the health experts to not go. It was their own words that said not to go, but they still went. I think it should be not even at that level of decision-making, though. The federal government should have been shutting down these leisure trips from the get-go. And they should remain shut down. It makes zero sense for you to be making a leisure trip right now. Of course, essential and other valid reasons for traveling should be allowed. There should be some flights, but for you to go to Cuba or the Dominican to soak up the sun, that's ridiculous, and it shouldn't even be something in the cards right now. That's a slip-up on Trudeau's part. Now, I will say we talked a lot about Canadian politicians, but this problem isn't unique to Canada, nor is it tied to just traveling. It's actually more of a symptom of a larger issue. It's not fundamentally the issue of politicians flying around the world. It's the double standards for powerful individuals, and it happens everywhere. America, Canada, probably worse so in a bunch of other countries around the world. This is something that goes far beyond just travel. Powerful people, politicians for example, they have access to a variety of things, double standards, extra protections that the average person does not. And it is troublesome. So, one example is legal. There have been various legal scandals that happen to politicians and powerful people, and they often find a way to wiggle themselves out of it. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is because they might know the lawyers or the judges or the lawmakers who are making the laws. They're politicians, they have connections like that. Maybe they're able to leverage their relationships to get a better deal or get a more lenient treatment or get a more lenient ruling. And if that's not possible, these people usually are rich. They're paid very well. They have the ability to campaign for various months without an income. Not just anyone can do that. and you take the risk of not winning too. So seemingly you have to be in a decent position to even take that responsibility on. And given that, you can probably afford the best lawyers who might have the connections that you lack, or the expertise that a public defender would not have, a seasoned veteran who can weasel their way in and out of any law and regulation that they want. And we see that time and time again. It goes for more than politicians, actually. This is more for just wealthy individuals in general. Then you have someone like Trudeau, the Prime Minister, who is implicated in various ethics scandals. You have him pressuring the Justice Department not to prosecute SNC-Lavalin because it matters to him in his home riding. You have Trudeau caught up in this ethics implication of giving out massive funding to the We Charity, a charity organization that has ties to his family directly that his wife was a part of. How is that okay? If any executive who was in the public sector or employee was caught up in a issue with that same magnitude, they'd likely be fired or forced to resign, or something crazy would happen to them. But we have these politicians who are committing equally egregious offenses, and nothing is really happening to them. Of course, this time around, the public was so riled up that they pressured Doug Ford and some individuals to issue out consequences, to remove certain titles and whatnot, but at the end of the day, they still have their job. They're still an elected official, and I'm not saying they should be fired or anything that extreme, but still, the real world, if you slip up like that and your employer finds out, you're probably finished here. In this case, we're actually the employer of the government individuals, the taxpayer, but the treatment and the leniency, it's there. You can even observe this in things like the vaccine rollout. Many politicians are jumping the queue, people who are not in a vulnerable position per se, but they feel very important. It's a grandiose way of thinking that they want to get themselves first in line versus the 90-year-old grandpa in the senior facility because they want it. They're a politician, they have access to it. It's a double standard again. You can have a perfectly healthy, youngish adult who is getting the vaccine ahead of someone in the senior care facility, or a doctor, or a nurse. When I think about politicians, I do see someone like Joe Biden. He definitely should be at the front of the line, a very elderly individual. But many others should not be. And it's funny too, because it's more so in America. You have politicians who have denied the pandemic, who have chalked up COVID to conspiracy thinking, and have been to these like anti-mask rallies and whatever. And here they are, first in line to get the vaccine. Hypocritical again, a double standard again. Something to be aware of when you're voting. Something to take note of when dealing and talking to politicians, because they seem to be thinking they can pull a fast one over you. Like this person, flying to Barbados for his holiday vacation when he tells you can't go anywhere. When he says you can't even see your family during Christmas. Like these people saying that COVID's a hoax, and here they are getting their vaccine right away. There is a war on truth, and it's the overarching issue here, and the politicians have not done a good job in illuminating that for us, that's for sure. Now, I feel like I jumped around a little bit in this conversation, but the bottom line here is that from an ethical standpoint, there is a certain onus on those who make the rules. If you have the power to influence public policy and standards, if you are in that position, if you are a leader, you have to follow them too. You have to set a good example. Oftentimes, it feels like the politicians are, a role model for a lot of people, even if they don't want to admit it. They look up to these people, and some of that behavior trickles down. In particular, we see that with a lot of the fighting. If politicians were more united, if the conservative and the liberal ones were trying to kill each other every couple of seconds, I feel like the people would mimic that. They'd copy it. But instead, we see the opposite here, where the politicians are fighting each other. They hate each other. And that's trickled down. People, regular citizens, are copying that. Now we have the politicians who are breaking the rules, doing whatever they want. People are going to copy that. As a leader, as an official, you have to set a good example, and you can't just be abusing your position to do what you want to do. It's not your job. There is also a whole other question and debate about what kind of people are actually getting into politics these days. I, for one, would have no interest in becoming a politician because it's such a unique position. So, first of all, your life is basically torn apart. The media is on you for everything. Your past history is dug up. If there's anything in there that's controversial, it's going to come up. People are going to hate you for it. Any slip up, anything you say incorrectly, you're getting hounded for. The life of your kids, your wife, your family, it's all public property now. It's exposed. It's very stressful. And you look at the benefits of that. The one thing that you can say is beneficial is you have power. You have the ability to influence these things. You can do this and this and that. Now, how many people are going for that perk, the power perk, for a good reason? And how many are going to it for an illicit one? And even there, you could have someone who still thinks they're doing something for a good reason, but it turns out being disastrous, you know? They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's possible too. Now, you may be wondering, okay, well, those things might be true, but what's the solution there? And in a democracy, the solution actually is the people. It's you. You are the solution. To be an active member and engaged member in a democracy, a democratic system and state. For you to be the one to hold the politicians accountable. If you see them slipping up, you are pressuring the premier to take action. And that's what happened here. It was a good thing. If someone is doing something that you think is foolish, you're voting them out. You're having it known to them. You're putting their job on the line. You're putting their reputation on the line. And to do that, though, you have to be informed. That was the key operative word in the sentence there, an informed citizen. And I think we're seeing that more and more. You know, people are getting more involved in politics, which is good. Of course, social media has played a role in that. That's probably one of the benefits, but at the same time, it's come with massive negative, and I've harped on that many times. The polarization, the fake news. We are getting more involved, but maybe not in the best way. Maybe we've gotten involved in a way that's toxic. Now, that's something to analyze in another episode, but the bottom line with what I'm saying right now is you really are the stopgap between total corruption and living in a peaceful society. If the citizens don't say something when they think something is wrong, it's a wrap for you. And that's one of the reasons why freedom of speech is so important. It gives you the power to criticize and say what you want, and the government can't shut you down for it. Interestingly enough, though, it seems like the shutting down part isn't really coming from the government too much now. It's other citizens who are trying to shut you down in its place. And that's equally as dangerous, actually. Something also to discuss in another episode, but I think I'm going on all these tangents right now. So before I lose track completely, I think it's a good place to end for today. Thank you for joining me. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. It'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. I'll see you soon.